have memories of the parks and the botanical gardens and, my granny flat. And of course, I was there, I believe, for 16 or even 17 years, and that's the longest I've ever lived in my life, in one house or one property. The garden's looking quite fine.
I think it probably would have been impossible to take the leap that created Adhisthana without there having been Madhyamaloka. And that had been started by Bhante, very explicitly saying he wanted some of his senior disciples who were carrying a lot of responsibility to live, if not together, then very close together in a central location. It broke the ground in terms of what we moved on to subsequently. It did what Bhante had wanted it to do. It created a very close-knit community of senior order members. Not always easy connections, but certainly living together, working together in close proximity. I think it was quite a cremation ground, and I think it forged some strong connections.
3 or 4 months after our arrival at Madhyamaloka, Paramartha went to live with his girlfriend in Beaconsfield, and I turned his room into a private office. My books, manuscripts, archives and images had been brought from Padmaloka, so that for the first time for many years I had them all under the same roof as myself.
Members of the Preceptors' College were often away. However, once a year they spent a month together.
And he asked me, much to my surprise. And so of course I said yes, because if he's asking me, I'll do it. And also it was a great honour.
At the Order Convention, Subhuti argued internationality would be good for the Order. By overcoming cultural conditioning, the universal Dharma is revealed.
As we invite new people from new backgrounds into the Order, we're forced to become more of a genuine Order. We transcend, therefore, all our limited conditionings and are united in the three jewels. The fact that we've got so little to unite us in other ways, on more superficial levels, means that we have to be united at the level of the three jewels.
You don't always talk all the time, do you?
My impression was like the people round the centre, they'd got Bhante, who was like a sort of helium balloon on a bit of string, which if they weren't careful, he'd just float off. He was so into like something other than what they were into.
I remember we all went to Nottingham one day for the opening of the Nottingham Buddhist Centre. And on the way back, I was in a car with a couple of order members and Bhante. I remember looking out the window and thinking, I just want to be with ordinary people. I want to watch football on a Saturday night, go to the pub. I had this very strong, even craving you could call it, to just be an ordinary person out there in the world.
Of young Forest fans, none of whom have ever seen their team beat Manchester United.
I realised after a while I needed to get out completely, not just from the Preceptors' College, but I needed to step out of the FWBO, as we were called then. So when I left Vajrakuta, I moved to Llangollen, and I had 2.5 years there, out of things, and trying to make a new life, working for the Inland Revenue, and then for the NHS, just trying to have a new life really. And I was very, very lonely, and it was a painful time for me. Everything that I'd lived for the previous 20 years, I'd shoved away, including people. And so I had no compass anymore. I didn't know what I was doing. I just knew I needed to get out. So yeah, that was a really big thing. And it was, although it was painful all the way through, not once did I doubt that I had to do it. I had to do it.
Hard-working social worker Mudita Sri needed her own home.
I had a very strong experience on entering the courtyard of the Buddhist centre. it smelt as if I'd arrived home. I feel very blessed. I feel my life is blessed, you know, like I turned up at the right place at the right time, met my teacher, met people who took an interest in me, keen interest, Malini and Deva Mitra, and who became my KM. And eventually I felt that I'd healed the wounds of the instability of my childhood in England and moving from place to place to place. It was a very different England, you know. You would see, I lived in Moseley Village in Birmingham, I grew up in Birmingham. And you'd see rooms to let. No blacks, no Irish, no dogs, no children. And this was a civilised society. So, of course, you know, those of us who could bought our own property.
Mr. Chairman and friends.
I kept hearing about this Bunty. I thought, that's I think, you know, there's a girls' magazine called Bunty. Bunty said this and Bunty said that. I better go and see who this Bunty is. And I met Bunty and I loved him from the very first moment. I sat down on the floor next to him and I just felt totally unbounded.
Mudita Sri and her brother shared a risk of kidney disease. When her health broke, Mudita Sri went to New Zealand and was cared for by her Kalyana Mitra, Malini.
I thought I'd go there for 3 months, stayed 14 months because a complete wreck. Anyway, came back and I was homeless. My brother had just gone on dialysis and it was a very difficult time. It was a cold spring and I was sitting in the park. I was feeling very sad. And somebody told me that Banty had said he'd seen me sitting in the park and I looked very unhappy. And I took that as a cue to go and see him. I told Banty how I was. I didn't say very much. But I think he picked up the fact that I felt I was useless. He said, Mudita Sri, get yourself into a community, keep your head down, and dwell in the mandala of aesthetic appreciation. And I said, but Banty, getting ready to argue, he said, but nothing. It was really Vajrik. I was shocked. And it was clear there was nothing more to be said on that topic.
It's a book that people find quite dense, but I loved it. I took it home and read it in like 3 days or something. And I immediately sat down and wrote a long letter to Banty, full of questions that had come up for me reading through the 3 jewels. And I sent it off and he replied maybe like 2 weeks later or something. And he'd gone into every question that I'd asked and replied very fully. So I had quite a curious mind, which I think he quite enjoyed. So I would have questions and if I wasn't very happy with the answers, I would let him know that. And we would have, you know, a bit of a back and forward about things. But also in that first physical meeting with him when I went to visit him, because my mother had died maybe a month before or something, and he was just incredibly kind and very interested, and we ended up talking about death and impermanence quite a lot. So it was an interesting combination of quite intellectually stimulating, but also very kind and very sort of personable and very interested in me.
And I didn't go and see him for about 18 months. He said, well, what are you up to these days, Mudita Sri? I've not seen anything of you. You asked me what I'm doing. I'm writing. I'd forgotten that even as a child I'd wanted to write. And he said, good. He said, one doesn't have to be a great writer. All one has to be is someone who has something to say.
And I'm waiting for Neruda to answer. And I am perpetually waiting a rebirth of wonder. Why are you so puritanical, comrade, kicking Allen Ginsberg out of Czechoslovakia?
I remember talking to him about the beat authors, which were really important for me at the time. and to a lot of people who had gathered in West London.
The schemers draw back weeping from their schemes. In my train seat, I renounce my power. So that I do live, I will die. And over for now the vomit.
He was asked who he most admired, etc. If I was to mention anyone, I would say Allen Ginsberg. And he says, not that I like his poetry. In fact, I quite don't like his poetry. But what I do like about Allen Ginsberg is he's unalterably himself. And that is a very rare quality these days.
It's an extraordinary work. Sangharakshita, a new voice in the Buddhist tradition.
He may not have said he was perfect, but he was the kind of person who acted as if he was right all the time. So I once accompanied Bhante to Sweden on a boat, and we were going to go on a retreat in Sweden. And it was a big boat. We had a little cabin, but there was a big sort of living area on the boat. It took quite a long time to get there. And at one end of this living area with seats and stuff were some trees. Now, I happened to go there first, and for some reason, Bhante only joined me a little while later. And I'd gone up to the trees, and they were plastic, but they were very good replicas, right? You know, and before those things were common. And when Bhante came, he immediately said, "Oh, look at those lovely trees." And I said to him, "Actually, Bhante, they're plastic." He said, "Oh no, they're trees, they can't be plastic." And I said, "Bhante, they are." Eventually I persuaded him to go and have a closer look.
I had my own direct experience of having encounters with Bhante in a sexual context. So I had my own, I'd been thinking about this for quite a long time, and I'd written to Bhante myself in 1991 to say that it was problematic, put it that way. I'm not going to say more than that, but it was problematic.
There was a particular point where I sort of wrote to Bhante expressing my concerns about his sexual activity, and if I can sort of sum up the response that I got, it was really, well, you know, please don't be too judgmental, you know, please don't judge me too harshly.
I did a solitary retreat at Gukyaloka. Subhuti was up the valley. He said, "I think this is a problem that we really need to address." So in 1997, when the Guardian article came out, I sort of thought we had an opportunity. I have to say, most of what Madeleine Bunting wrote I thought was hogwash and quoted out of context. But I think the very fact that I phoned her up and I was open to talking to her, and she was very friendly, we had a really good conversation, and I did tell her that I disagreed with most of what she said. But this one thing about Bhante and sex, I thought was now good, this has given us an opportunity.
We would do well to ask ourselves what it means to be a disciple. What are the duties inherent in discipleship?
Bhante was going to lead a few retreats in the summer. So I went there, and I remember as soon as I walked in the door, I thought, I've made a mistake. I shouldn't have come here. I was going for a walk with Moksha Priya every day and basically complaining and talking about Bhante. He said, "Go and talk to Subhuti." So I went to talk to Subhuti, and Subhuti said, "Yeah, tell him what's going on. He can take it." So I did. We went for a walk. We left the convento at 2 in the afternoon, blue sky, but there were some white clouds over there. And I said to Bhante, "There were some clouds over there, Bhante. Do you think we should go back?" No, we'll be fine." How wrong he was. So I had 3 things to say. The first one was that when I was young and good looking, and I had sex with Bhante a number of times myself, and then he just kind of cut me off. I've heard that from other people as well. So I just wanted to complain about that. You know, I said, you abandoned me, basically. And I was really not happy with the response to that. He started talking about, maybe you've got an abandonment complex because your mum, you know, leaving and so on. And I should have argued with him, I didn't. The second thing was the wider thing. Now, looking back in hindsight, I think it was a very bad idea you had sex with your disciples. And all he said to that was, fair enough. That's all he said. I had one more thing that I had to say to him, and I was really sorry I had to say it because he was soaking wet. I said, and another thing is, I think mealtimes at Madhyamaloka are weird. And this surprised him. He said, what? I said, I could see he was shaken by this. And I said, well, what happens is, we all sit down and we're in silence and we eat in silence and you start a conversation. Yes. And it's always about something that you want to talk about. And he was really shocked, I think a little bit upset. And he said, but I thought you all wanted to hear from me. And as soon as he said that, I thought, yes, I can see that. I can see that that's your expectation. And then he said, well, no one else has said anything like this. Well, there are some other people who feel the same, Bhante. And he said, I'll be very disappointed if they haven't said anything to me. And I didn't say anything because I thought, well, they haven't, Bhante, obviously, but they feel the same. But I didn't say that. Anyway, we came back to the convent and then we were a bit warm and a bit drier. And just as we parted company, he says, keep in touch. And that was really sweet. It was really sweet because I'd given him a hard time. And he just said, keep in touch. And I thought that I would. I really thought I would.
The next morning, Ratnaguna left the retreat. Days after arriving on this retreat, Sangharakshita was aware his sight was deteriorating, as he recounted a few months later.
From even the very first day that I suffered this loss of eyesight, I think I could almost say I didn't regret not being able to read. After all, I've read so much in the course of my life, right? And I couldn't help thinking sometimes, well, maybe Mother Nature is giving me a hint and saying, look here, Sangharakshita, you've read so much since you were a boy. It's about time you stopped. It's about time you reflected more. So I've sort of taken the hint. And, to be quite frank, I'm quite happy to take the hint and, reflect more.
During the day, it's quite obvious that he does do a lot of reflection, perhaps on themes that he's been reflecting on for quite some years. In a sense, you get the person, but somehow you sense a vast mountain range somewhere behind him, as it were, that is inaccessible to one's ordinary experience of the man.
I felt like a swallow, flitting around him, and he was like a mountain, very steady and watchful and modest and undemanding. You don't feel like he ever wants something from you. It's a sort of steadiness where he's interested and curious.
General Jaruzelski imposed the martial law in December 1981. I remember it back then, the sense that it would never change. It's like it would always be like that, yeah? And so actually in the 90s, I was quite amazed that it did change. It wasn't so grey anymore.
I'm sure that Poland would be a very fertile ground for the sowing of the seed of the Dharma.
Sangharakshita was accompanied by friends from Paris, Holland and London, including 28-year-old Polish mitra Mikhail Bali.
And I have to admit that I'm feeling just a little emotional.
Muszę się przyznać, że czuję się co nieco podniecony.
In the first place, this is my first visit to Poland.
Po pierwsze, jest to moja pierwsza wizyta w Polsce.
Translating for him, and I remember him after that, he said something like, he felt like we made a deep contact during the talk. And at that time I didn't know what he was talking about, actually. I just, as far as I was concerned, we didn't. But actually, few years after that, quite a few years after that, I think I understood. I sort of, I sensed, with hindsight, I knew that something happened then.
I believe it's the first time that the survey has actually been published in its entirety in another language. It's by an old friend of mine.
When we went to that pizza place, things got quite unpleasant there at some point because the guy was getting drunk and I was sort of torn. And I remember at that point Bante sort of offered to stay with me just to make me comfortable so I didn't have to experience that conflict. I was really moved, really touched by that. For a moment it felt like what it could be like knowing Bante when he was young and, like being the same sort of age. Yeah, and I sometimes had that. I experienced that with Bante, that, it wasn't, the age difference wasn't such a big deal, yeah? He was probably the oldest friend I've ever had in my life.
I spent the rest of May 2002 at Madhyamaloka, dictating the epilogue to Moving Against the Stream.
Just read those last 2 sentences.
It was not easy for anybody to see what the next stage in my restitution should be.
I'd read on from there what we did have.
One thing was clear.
Perhaps it should be one thing, however, was clear. It was clear that there really would have to be a new Buddhist movement in England.
Bante's main project in that period was writing his memoirs, Moving Against the Stream, in which he's giving his account of really the start of the controversies that have surrounded him in British Buddhism. In the communications office, a lot of this stuff had just been thrown at me as accusations. A text like the FWBO files talks about, for example, his relationship with Terry de la Mare, his friendship, I should say, with Terry de la Mare, as an accusation that he acted wrongly. And, I never believed that, but I took the opportunity of those dinners to sometimes just raise that.
3 weeks before he died, that is, before he committed suicide, Terry made a hollow pottery head, blackboard hideous, huge Aztec eyes staring, sanpaku, great gaping mouth hole lined, shark-like with jagged teeth. Was going to paint the inside red before he died, that is, before he committed suicide, so that the red colour would show through eye holes and mouth holes like blood. He called it Mother, could just as well have called it Woman, or perhaps Death.
He responded, very affectionately, and with still, I think, a sense of sadness about the kind of things that Terry had been through, and the suffering, the depth of suffering that Bante had seen in Terry, and how painful he'd found that, because someone he felt so warmly towards was in such pain. He also talked about how Terry had been a sort of experimental guinea pig with the use of hallucinogenic drugs to treat psychotic illnesses. And again, Bante was very, very sorry that had happened.
Even though Terry had committed suicide and he never saw Terry again over all those decades, he's still there in Bante's heart. For me, friendship is also, crucially important for my life. And to listen to Bante reflecting on the life of his friend and hear the love in his voice for his friend was very, very moving indeed.
It's very, very important that if you're to live united with fellow order members in the order as a whole, in your chapter, your community, or as you happen to meet them, then you must bear in mind, whatever the outward difference is, however difficult you may find some order members, and you will find some order members difficult. Some people find me difficult, yeah? You have to bear in mind that you're all going for refuge, yeah? To the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And that is what unites you. And then, of course, you must radiate love. Oh dear. I don't suppose many of you will really be very good at this for some time to come. But yes, it's easy enough to feel friendly feelings towards other order members, yeah? Even to people you happen to meet in other situations, but actually to radiate it, you know, so that it shines forth from your face and from every word that you speak, that's much more difficult. But do your best, yeah? Just try to cultivate friendly feelings and a friendly attitude towards all the people that you happen to meet, and especially, of course, within the order, within the movement as a whole.
Despite being busy, I kept in touch with Mikhail in East London, where he had a girlfriend and was working at Friends Organic. At the moment, I'm enjoying a relative respite from my sleeplessness, but the underlying problem is still there. It is a combination of high blood pressure, insomnia, and palpitation, which appear to reinforce one another, and between them to create a cycle which is difficult to break through. My insomnia was naturally a cause of much concern to the community, as it was to many friends both far and near, and they were greatly relieved when Mikhail arrived and moved into Paramartha's old room.
The first year was, I mean, I was with him most of the time, day and often night, on call as it were. He had better moments, but most of the time he had just very, very little energy.
During the whole of this period, I carried on more or less as usual, except that early in 2003 I told Subhuti, Sona and Mahamati and the rest of the community that I did not want to hear anything of a disturbing or controversial nature, with the result that for about a year I did not know about the upheaval that was going on within the community and within the FWBO.
After you had gone, I lay in bed for about an hour, rising at about 7:45 a.m.
I often found myself walking through darkening streets, occasionally going into a shop, usually a second-hand bookshop. Before long I would happen to meet 2 or 3 friends in the dream, not in real life, and together we would go to a cafe or a tea shop where I would have a cup of tea and a cake.
While I was preparing breakfast, Bhante was writing up like his night, as it were, the record of his night, so how much he'd slept, but also his dreams. And I think he talked about it more than once, that during that it was a horrible time for him, but the dreams were amazing dreams, archetypal dreams and dreams with his teachers, and there was a lot of dreams he wrote up, and I've got actually all these pages from that time. He gave them to me. He was writing it up almost every day, like a record of that year, and we were often exchanging the dreams. He would tell me his dreams and I was telling him my dreams. And he was telling me what happened during the night. Like sometimes, it might have been just an ordinary night. He didn't sleep, or he slept a bit. But sometimes there was like things happening as well. Like, once he got a visit from how can I call it? Freshly deceased order member from India. somebody who just died, another member from India he'd known, and then that's what Bhante understood, that he was visited by him in the night and he called out his name and he was aware of him.
Just 3 years ago, almost to the day, Bhante handed on the headship to the public preceptors. Very quickly, I began to realize that, together with my colleagues in the college and council, that there was drastic reform needed in our order and movement. For us, it was summed up in the slogan, "Open up the movement and intensify the order." And we have been deliberately doing what we can to bring that about. Opening up seemed to us the first need, and I think that this convention has been very much in that spirit of opening up.
Acceptance of homosexuality, which is a same-sex sort of notion, I think, too. Eh? The point. You're using up some of my valuable time doing this, by the way.
So the single-sex idea is not outdated because it's an effective practice for developing greater individuality. And all the four speakers here, I'm sure, have benefited from it. The single-sex idea is not outdated because the pursuit of deepening individuality is never outdated. And the benefits in our movement are apparent. Without the single-sex practice, it's very unlikely that women would be ordaining women, and that women and men would have an equal ordination, again, which I think is something that's unique in the Buddhist world.
As a black woman in this movement, and as a black woman in this society, there is a definite imbalance. In general, white people have more power than black people. What do I do as a black person? Do I retreat into the black community? Or do I say, I'm going to make my stand and become whoever I'm going to become within the context of this society and within the context of this movement? I don't think it would have helped me to have withdrawn because I wasn't reflected. So maybe my arguments aren't very strong, but it's coming at it from a slightly oblique angle and may enable people to think a little bit about the comments I've made and how it relates to the single-sex principle. Or ideal?
Dobrego dnia, cześć. He specifically asked not to be informed of anything that might upset him, that might cause, worsen his state. So that's what I heard things, but I wouldn't pass it on, including the Yashomitra thing and the whole storm around it.
That letter was a kind of catalyst for something that maybe something else would have been a catalyst. I mean, it's interesting because it was as though it had been a secret, Bhante's sexual activity. And of course, having been around since 1970 something or other, it was like, to me, it never was a secret. And it never was a problem.
That was my third year in England, but I still didn't quite know the English culture. So that was one factor. I was still trying to work out what people were saying when they were saying something or not saying something. And I could just sense that there was something in the air. I didn't know exactly what it was, but people were very tense. And, it's only later I worked it all out. But I arrived in the middle of a very difficult situation.
So yeah, people were upset, and I think just kind of lost faith in Bhante. They presumably had him on a pedestal, and then he wasn't who they thought he was. And at Madhyamaloka we do the prostration practice, which Bhante and his teachers are there. So when you prostrate, you're prostrating to the whole refuge tree, of course to the Buddha, but Bhante's your kind of doorway. And people just found that very difficult. People had very, very strong reactions. And that was just difficult, retreat after retreat, and trying to let people have their reactions, of course, and to talk that through. But it was difficult. I was surprised how quick to judge people were, I guess.
So it was like the appearance was that everything was alright, but actually it wasn't. And I realized, like gradually, I was sort of like a buffer in between Bhante and the external world, but also in between Bhante and Madhyamaloka. So that was actually quite difficult. I didn't know it at that time, but it was very difficult being in that situation and talking to some, senior order members. I was still quite new to Sri Ratna. Sort of, you have certain idea of what people are like and what they might behave like, after so and so many years of practice, and what the relationship is to the teacher. And sometimes it wasn't like that. I was often sort of upset or angry about people's behavior towards Bhante. I won't go into the details here.
I hadn't gone to talk to him about this myself. I had something I wanted to talk to him about practice, but he started off a conversation saying something like he thought the movement had been through a kind of teenage rebellion. And I was a bit, When
I look back, in that year we were much closer than ever after that, I think. I did feel that sort of intimacy. Just we were spending a lot of time together, and it was very, I can't describe it, but it was very direct. I was trying to draw Bhante, but I don't draw very well.
What do you think you say now then?
Well, going through a teenage rebellion. Maybe he has this thing in the past, hasn't he, about the order being 16 years old, and he gave a series of talks on that on the 16th order birthday. Now we're a young adult, and now we've got the keys to the door. And he gave the 10 Pillars talks, I think, maybe on that occasion. So maybe he was thinking we were more adult as a kind of community, and yet we'd gone through all this kind of turbulence, and maybe it was, I don't know what he would have said. Maybe it was sort of kill the leader, maybe all sorts of things. I guess part of teenage rebellion, aren't they? Not all bad, I guess. It seems to be a separation that needs to happen sometimes, isn't it? And it's turbulent, isn't it? And I'm not a parent, but I've seen it happen with parents.
Though there is a great deal of suffering in the world, much of it is due not to natural evil, but to the morally evil behaviour of other people, especially as supported by this or that ideology. It is not enough, therefore, that we should seek to popularise mindfulness and metta, desirable as this may be. We have also to demolish the wrong views that undergird morally evil behaviour, and I suspect that the work of demolishing them will be one of Triratna's main tasks for a long time to come.
Nie jest to już czerwona, ale tęczowa zaraza. Co chciałem przez to powiedzieć, że grozi naszym sercom i umysłom pewna ideologia, która nas chce sobie podporządkować.
Uda się! Chłopak, dziewczyna, normalna rodzina! Chłopak, rodzina! Chłopak, dziewczyna!
In 2009, over a 3-day match, Mahamati and Subhuti bowled questions and Bhante batted.
I see a similarity between the persecution of homosexuals in the West and the oppression of the Dalits in India. Both, in different ways and for different reasons, have suffered a great deal of oppression over many centuries. I have worked directly for the cause of the Dalits, but not for the cause of homosexuals in the West or even in Britain. In some ways, I would have liked to have done so. In the West, we have to understand the strength of tradition in India, and we must not lightly ignore the very positive aspects of that tradition, or dismiss Indians' fears and reactions when they believe those are threatened. I think each side has to understand the cultural parameters of the other. In the West, we've had the permissive movement, which has not happened in India.
They're part of society much, much more than we are in the West. And society is cohesive in a way that in the West we can't really understand. We have no experience of it. So, you know, any attempt to sort of argue it away or sort of soften it okay, quite a few people might have been accepting of it. Quite a few people might have, if Bhante had come out with a partner, you know, quietly accepted. But what about the wider order? What about all the wider movement? What about the wider society? Yeah? Because even now, we have people attacking us very, very, very strongly just for this reason. Just for this reason.
Who am I?
In his aphorisms, he talks about, you know, I'm much better and much worse than people think I am, and that when you treat someone as more than human, in a way you treat them as less than human. And I think that's something to really, well, I've found productive to really reflect on.
If I was going to come back to the movement, I had to reconcile my relationship with Bhante. So that happened over degrees. I went down and did a week's solitary retreat. I was meditating one day and I thought, oh, I'd like to go and see Bhante, which is new to me, you know. So I phoned up and I spoke to his secretary and I said, I'd like to see Bhante on the way home. And he's ill at the moment, he's got the flu, but phone again tomorrow. So I did, and although he was ill, he wanted to see me, which is nice. So I went to see him. Now this was completely different from any other time I'd met him, because I must have shed to a certain degree my authority projection onto him, because up to then I was seeing him as a very flawed teacher, When I sat down with him in his sitting room there, I didn't see him like that at all. I saw him as a very old friend. And all my friends are flawed, and I'm flawed. So why can't he be flawed, you know? So it was lovely, it was much better, I was much more easy with him. Then the next thing that happened was he came up to Manchester, and I remember he came in one afternoon and I was putting white strips on all the stairs so that he could see where he was going, didn't want him to trip up. And I was on my knees, and as he came up and he said, doing penance? And I said, actually, yes, I am. And I was introducing Bhante and I choked up, which I hardly ever do when I'm speaking, hardly ever. I was just talking about him and I had to stop. You know, I just couldn't carry on like that anymore. So that was a really big thing. And then the morning he left, I saw them off, him and Dhamamati it was, saw them off in the car, goodbye, and then I went for a walk. And then what happened then was, I realised that the refuge tree, or what we now call the tree of reverence and respect, there was now nothing blocking the Adhisthana coming down from it. I don't know how I thought that, but until then, it was like blocked off from me. But that last time I met him and expressed my love for him in a way, I went for a walk and I thought, oh, it's all coming down again. So, yes, so then I was fully reconciled to Bhante, but it took years,
Hello, Apramada readers. My name is Ratnaguna, and today I'm going to be talking to a friend of mine, Adhyachita, who's been a member of the Triratna Buddhist Order for almost 40 years. He's a clinical psychologist, retired. He's the author of a book, actually, which I read a little while ago, a very interesting book called Thinking at the Crossroads, a Buddhist exploration of Western thought.
At that particular time, things were rather difficult. I was suffering again from insomnia, even from chronic sleep deprivation. So I had very little energy. And in the midst of this, well, there was the move. And the greater part of the packing up was done, you know, by Paramatma, who worked like a Trojan, one might say. I also did a little bit of packing up my own shrine things with the help of Vijayaruchi, who was then my secretary. And of course downstairs there was Kalyana Prabha, you know, packing up the whole library. 140 boxes, and arranging for them to be transplanted to Adhisthana. She did all that. But I had this sort of strong feeling, rightly or wrongly, well, I must get there. There mustn't be any delay, otherwise I could die, before I get to Adhisthana. So the whole thing was speeded up.
But it was at a cost to him. And it continued to be for some months, because it wasn't an easy place for him to be. Very, very painful for me to watch his pain as well.
My first months in my new home were thus neither very peaceful nor very happy. Nonetheless, I saw visitors from time to time and kept up with my correspondence as best I could. Dictating letters, especially letters to old friends, was one of my few sources of pleasure. It provided me with an outlet for creativity, albeit a limited one, and the more creative I could be, the better I felt.
I've lost the chronology because it was like a bit of a twilight, timeless space as well, and of course we were, up in the night, and so everybody was a little sleep deprived. So you lose the sort of where you are, There was a period where he didn't think he had the energy to listen to anything, but I ended up buying him maybe half a dozen box sets of P.G. Wodehouse.
That's the worst of being in a strange club. Absolutely, without intending it, you find yourself constantly trampling upon the vested interests of the oldest inhabitants. "Hello, Face," I said. "Cheerio, Ugly," said young Bingo, and we settled down to have a small one before lunch.
In a way, I think that helped. P.G. Wodehouse therapy.
I think Paramartha at that time was finding it very difficult. Bhante wasn't well, and Bhante just arrived at Adhisthana a few months previously, and any decisions that Paramartha had to take, he was taking them in a way on his own. So Subhuti asked me to go down and just sort of help him for a week. But I knew that it would never just be a week.
5 years later, Subhadra was still a carer. The other carers were Buddhadasa and Sangharakshita. Secretarial work at the time was in the hands of Stana Shraddha, Mahamati and Ashvajit.
He will just say things and I'll think to myself, well, that's interesting, that's an interesting response. Oh, yes. And his memory is wonderful, still very, very sharp, although physically he's frail, obviously. Our spiritual relationship has moved from one of considerable vertical height to having at least some horizontal dimension nowadays.
We are slowly getting to know each other. I'm not the most forthright of friends, and Bhante's got quite enough connections, as it were, already. It's phenomenal how many people he is in touch with. He gets written to by various public preceptors, chairs of centres, order members from all different sections of the order that just kind of want to kind of ask him something or be in touch with him, let him know how he's doing. Then there's all the people that come on retreat. They often want to come and see him. And then you've got mitras that have asked for ordination, friends that they've just got involved in the movement and they want to come and thank him. So he meets many of them. So I think he's got a very broad knowledge of the movement and the order.
My whole life has been toned by his approach to the Dharma and his example, especially in the example of friendship. That, of course I would be there for him when he was in his final years. And at one point he did say to me that he just wondered what might happen in his final years, because as time went on he might have to get put into a home. And I was able to say to him, we're your friends, that we'll keep you you know, in your own environment as long as we can. We'll be there for you. I'll be there for you. I said, I promise I'll be there for you. And that only if medical issues intervene that we can't look after you, only unless that happens, you know, we'll have you here. So, you know, that was as important for me to express as for him to hear, I think.
There was a period we went on holiday even. I mean, looking back, it was probably the very last period where he could manage to go away. He really did very little apart from just sit. It was quite an extraordinary period. It was like a very intense retreat for me, I must say. It's almost like he just entered this sort of non-conceptual space and rested for a week very deeply. And I got on with a little bit of study, but the atmosphere was very palpable, extraordinary, which was delightful to partake in, of course.
Paramartha had to go back to New Zealand to look after his mother who was dying from cancer. And he was away for 7 months altogether. And during that time, Bhante started a series of pieces of writing. The first one was a reverie cum reminiscence in the form of a letter to Paramartha.
He wrote to me every week, sometimes twice a week. I'd write to him twice a week.
I was with a group of friends and I was anxious because I had promised my mother to be back by 8 o'clock and it was now 9:30. I would have to get a taxi, I said. Whereupon you stepped forward saying, don't worry, I'll drive you to your mother's place.
And as he's getting older, he says that it does take more time for him to come out of the sleep state. You know, sometimes he's beginning to say now that he's not really fully awake until after breakfast. And yes, he certainly perks up after his breakfast.
By coincidence, since I've been put full-time on the team, also Bhante's health has improved a lot. So he started to sleep much better, eat much better, and started to have more energy to see people and to do his writing. So it became, in a way, relatively easy for me to be carer. Yeah. He turned on his headphones and the radio maybe 5 minutes before the news started. And usually I can't hear what he's listening to because spoken voice doesn't really come out of the headphones very well. But on that occasion there was a piece of music. I think there was a little commercial or a little announcement, and the piece of music conjured up my teenage years. Bhante was, for a moment, a bit of a Vajraguru, where, by coincidence, this pop song came out of his headpiece and had this effect on me.
Over the last year, I've been involved in dictation with Subhadra. One of the interesting things I've always found is that, you know, after doing 2 or 3 paragraphs, I know this is the same as Subhadra, we're often left wondering, where's this going? and so we speculate a little bit. But as with any truly creative mind, you know, you can't always second guess where Bhante's going with a particular piece. At 92, still producing all this body of work.
And the last time I saw him was at Adhisthana 6 months before he died. And I hadn't seen him for quite a number of years by then. So I went to Adhisthana and we had a lovely time, and he told me an amazing story about this ring he was wearing at the time. He had this ring on, a gold ring with a diamond on it. It was a lady's ring. And I asked him about it. Oh wow, Bhante, you know, that's a bit of a sparkler on your finger. And he got completely excited about talking about it. So he told me the story behind it. And he seemed so lively. You know, he couldn't see. By then he'd lost his vision. But, you know, I thought there's Bhante, you know, the one I remember, you know, very cheeky, a bit naughty.
I knew it was making me unhappy, obviously, but I thought this was because of my own weakness and lack of sort of resolve.
This was the moment in 1992 that a man from Norfolk went public for the first time about the abuse he says he suffered at the hands of the leader of a Buddhist organisation.
I think he hadn't really understood what was in the television programme, actually. Probably Subhuti hadn't said much. And I remember that first conversation in early December 2016, Bhante was quite taken aback that there was still so much criticism in the media, and probably also how much it was still raising questions for order members and upsetting order members and mitras and so on. He was quite taken aback. So I explained, yeah, that is the case, that is so. And we talked about it perhaps one more time over the next week or so. And then Bhante was unexpectedly taken into hospital. And I went to visit Bhante in hospital that first night he was in hospital. And he was there for about a week. He had pneumonia. And actually, when I asked him afterwards, he didn't remember me visiting because he had an oxygen mask and so on. But he was sitting up outside of his bed, actually. He was sitting up. He was expecting me. Subhadra had asked him if I should come and visit, so I'd just come to see him and obviously also to see Subhadra, who was staying with Bhante. I remember Bhante saying to me something like, "I haven't forgotten our conversation." That's all he said.
He asked me to take dictation. I was very, very, very reluctant, and he was very, very insistent. But yes, he dictated to me his confession within about an hour of coming back from hospital, which is very moving.
In certain respects, I did not act in accordance with what my position in the movement demanded, or even as a true Buddhist. I am thinking in particular of the times when I've hurt, harmed or upset fellow Buddhists, whether within Triratna or out of it.
I did meet him after that, and I got this feeling that he felt slightly in a cleft stick. And I think people were saying to him, "Oh, it'd be really good if you said something, da-di-da-di-da." But a general statement to people that think they understand that Bhante acted unskillfully, etc., and had no experience with themselves, he was talking to those people, and I don't actually have a great deal of sympathy with that, although on another level it did seem to work. So maybe it was a good thing.
With the confessional statement, a lot of people really appreciated it a lot, and I read quite a lot of Bhante's correspondence to him, as did Tanashara. A lot of people writing, some people saying as far as they were concerned he had nothing to apologise for. Some people saying it was a great relief he had said this. Later on there were some critical letters. For example, some people writing to him saying that he had not been specific and enough.
I mean, I find that really interesting, that people are getting so upset by the fact that Bhante had sex with other people under certain circumstances. It's like, why? It's got nothing to do with you. That was one of the last things he said to me a few weeks before he died was, "And of course we've all made mistakes." And I said, "Tell me about it." Tell me about it.
5 months after his confessional statement, Sangharakshita was reflecting on forgiveness. He recalled 2 of William Blake's proverbs. The cut worm forgives the plough. Drive your cart and your plough over the bones of the dead. Those bones were the dead cultures, civilizations, and religions. What then came to mind was Alexander Pope's verse, "To err is human, to forgive divine."
When I was in hospital last year and close to death, I not only confessed my unskillful actions, but asked for the forgiveness of those I had harmed. Reflecting on this recently, I realised that I had been wrong to ask for forgiveness. It was enough that I had confessed and that I had also forgiven all those who had offended me. My confession covered a wide field, as my unskillfulness had done, from being disrespectful to my father as a teenager, to some of my sexual activity with order members and mitras.
Some updated, extra, frequently asked questions, which I read to him in the last month of his life. And first of all, he was really surprised that we still had more questions to answer, because he thought we'd done that about a year before with a lot of other questions that we'd sort of read to him before publishing. So he was really taken aback, because he'd been receiving a lot of appreciative letters over that last year, and he thought we kind of dealt with all the questions. I found it painful to read what people said about him and the way they spoke about him. But he always seemed to take it sort of just very calmly, never ever reacted.
I remember one day him telling me about the day that he'd taken his Bodhisattva ordination from Dharma Rinpoche, and how it was one of the happiest days of his life. And it felt like everything that happened before had brought him to that point, and everything that's happened since flowed from that. When I'm ordaining people, they're saying the lines of acceptance, and one of them is, for the benefit of all beings, I accept this ordination. So I feel that's probably more than anything else what unites me with Bhante, is this sense of working together in this great project, which is basically the knowledge that there are no beings, and the wisdom aspect, but the compassion aspect as well, of however empty all beings are, there is still suffering in the world. And that's what I feel I've been given from Bhante more than anything else, is a path and a way to practice with that. That's kind of practical and pragmatic, but also extraordinary and sublime.
Bhante has devoted himself over many years to the translation of this very, very important text.
Not by hatred. Are hatreds ever pacified here in the world? They are pacified by love. This is the eternal law. For 1 whole month, I was completely immersed, as it were, in the world of the Dhammapada, living in the world of the Buddha's teaching as contained in the Dhammapada.
Old age is not easy, and to lose your mobility and to lose your eyesight, and even begin, that your hearing begins to go, it's not easy to handle that. But he said that, with the support of his friends around him, that it's been one of the happiest times in his life. I think he said even the happiest time in his life.
Well, given how much he's given to myself and others, it seems very little, doesn't it, to give back, just to help them out and be of some service. Whatever little talents I've got, at least I can be of some service, if nothing else. So, and I think just what he's given us is profound and deep, and the roots of that go, well, probably deeper than we realise, actually.
My favorite things that Bhante has thought or said is about this, that you don't there is a hierarchy, but you don't assume the hierarchy. You just meet somebody and you just communicate, and in time you work it out who's got what, and some people might have this more developed and somebody else might have that more developed, but you don't assume that just because somebody is this or that, they will be higher than you or lower than you or whatever. Yeah? I really love it.
You know, Bhante is my psychopomp. He led me into paradise, into hell, wherever. When I met Bhante, and my interaction with Bhante over the years has existed on a level that goes way beyond my likes and dislikes for him and for what he's done, not done, or whatever. He's just led me somewhere sort of astonishing, and continues to. Because I think actually it's not finished by any means. You know, our relationship with Bhante is not finished. You know, maybe it's only just starting in a way.
This extraordinary creative man who was, in certain ways, rather messy, in his own phrase. I think if he hadn't been messy, I'm not sure I would have been attracted. If he'd been squeaky clean, I don't think I'd have wanted him. I wanted a messy guru because I was messy, and a guru who was, really engaging with the issues of living in a very vital way, and obviously trying to work out something in himself. I'm very glad that happened. I'm sorry that some people feel they got damaged or in any way in the course of that. And I do think that it's a mistake for teachers to have sex with their disciples, because I think it adds a dimension of complexity to what is already a complex and a problematic, often, relationship. Periods can be complex and problematic. Not in yours and my case, of course. Yeah.
Bhavatu sabba mangalam rakhantu sabba devata sabba sanghanu bhavena sada suti bhava antu te. As the donor of the jewel of all the Buddha Dharmas, she brings about the 10 powers of a Buddha. She cannot be crushed. She protects the unprotected with the help of the 4 grounds of self-confidence. She is the antidote to birth and death. She has a clear knowledge of the own being of all dharmas, for she does not stray away from it. The perfection of wisdom of the Buddhas, the Lords, sets in motion the wheel of the Dharma.
sweet.